First question, how can there be intentionality? By intentionality we mean aboutness, the fact that thoughts can be about something, for instance about a horse or about Paris, etc. But it seems that causal processes, for instance a neural pattern in the brain, they can't be about something. What would that mean? Normal causal processes like a rock falling down and into the pond or hitting you in the head or something, they aren't about something. So what does it mean then that a causal process can be about something? There are two common theories, similarity theories and causal theories. The similarity theory, it says that thoughts are about something that looks or are similar to them. So I'm thinking my thoughts about horses are similar to horses in the world. But there are some problems for such a theory, because it seems that sometimes we can have thoughts about something that is not that aren't similar. I can see a horse far away, and it just looks like a dot, and still it makes me think about the horse. I know it's a horse. My thoughts represent that horse, even if it's no similarity. Or I can see a picture which is very similar to Mary, but is in fact her twin sister Susie. And so if I'm thinking about Susie because I know it's a picture of her, then it seems that something is wrong with the similarity theory, because it's not a representation or a thought about Mary, it's about Susie. These counterexamples could be support instead for the causal theory, that this dot in the far away causes you to think of a horse, or the picture of Susie causes you to think of Susie. So one can think that it's because there's a causal connection, that it's about a horse or about Susie. But it's also easy to make a counterexample to a causal theory. For instance, we've seen how you can put electricity on someone's brain and make them see faces. Or you can do drugs, or you can be hit in the head, and let's say that gave you a thought of a dog, then we want to say that this thought is about the dog and not about being hit in the head or being put electricity in the brain or doing drugs, etc. So it's a bit tricky with both of them, and there are also some related problems for causal theories of thinking. For instance, you have the disjunction problem, which says, well, if a representation or a thought about a horse can be activated either by seeing a horse or by seeing a zebra in the fog or in disguise or by being hit in the head, etc., should we then say that, well, this representation is a representation of a horse or a zebra or a hit in the head, all the different things that can cause it? Why should we say that it's just a representation of a horse or about a horse? And the misrepresentation problem is the question of how representations can be wrong, how they can misrepresent something. If I see a zebra in front of me, but I think of a horse, why should we say that this is a misrepresentation? Why shouldn't we just say, well, if you're thinking of a horse, then it's a representation of a horse? Why don't we just say there's cause and effect, and it doesn't make sense to say that the effect can be wrong? It's just, it is what it is. So how can we explain that something can be a misrepresentation? Well, let's try to solve the problems. And first we start by remembering how the mind is connected to the world. We've looked at that earlier, seen how we have these different feature detecting neurons that can see contour and distance and color and direction and so forth. And they respond then to states of affairs. They are activated when they see the different features in the world. And if that happens several times, then we saw how they would be activated together and stored as images in the brain. So if I've seen a horse many times, I can have this image of a horse stored in the brain. But we've also seen how these stored images are then connected with other images in the mind. So other facts about horses, riding, and things that we associate with horses are also connected to that horse image in our mind. And so on the one hand, then you have horses and grass and riding and things that are related in the world, which are structurally similar to how, if our mind works properly, how the image of a horse is related to images of grass and riding, etc., in our brain. So you could say that both the similarity and causal theory are partially right. On the one hand, there is a causal process from the horse via the neurons to this image of the horse, but on the other hand, the reason why it's these neurons activated that image is based on similarities. So they're both right, you could say. But we do solve a lot of problems if we make a distinction between representation in a narrow and in a wide sense. Representation in a narrow sense is just a consistent relation. For instance, a consistent relation between a horse in the world and a horse image in your brain. That the horse in the world activates this horse image in your brain when you see it. But it's more. There are many consistent relations in the world that aren't representations. So mosquito bite and scratching or itching, or the coming of autumn and the leaves falling of the trees, etc. A lot of consistent relations that aren't representations in the sense that we usually mean. So in this wider and common sense, we should add not just a narrow understanding of representation as a consistent relation, but also how this image in our mind is related to other images in our mind, which can then be structurally similar to how states of affairs relate to each other in the world. Because if you have a representation in this wide sense, then that can be correct, and we can understand why it can be correct as opposed to a misrepresentation. That's difficult to explain if you just have representation in a narrow sense, just a consistent causal relation. But in a narrow sense, then we understand, because you can have a correct representation, but also a false or a misrepresentation when these relations go wrong in one way or another. So, for instance, if I see a horse standing on the grass in front of me, I can misrepresent it in many ways. I can think it's a zebra, or I can think it's horses are a kind of cat or a kind of politician, or I can represent it as being in the top of a tree instead of standing on the grass. So all sorts of ways of misrepresenting. But if I have a representation in my mind of a horse standing on the grass, and it's related to other facts about what horses are and how they relate to grass and riding, etc., which is structurally similar to how it is in the real world, then I have a correct representation, as opposed to a misrepresentation. So that explains how we can have misrepresentations. It also solves the disjunction problem, because if I see a horse in front of me, it will activate all these horse facts in my mind, and this activated framework makes it then into a representation of a horse instead of a representation of a zebra, because that's how we now define that what the representation in the wide sense is, and it explains why it's about a horse and not about a zebra. Finally, we can solve the problem of intentionality, because the relating of a concept to a larger framework, for instance, then a horse in a horse framework, or the Eiffel Tower in Paris, etc., this putting it integrated into a larger framework is what it means that the representation is intentional or about something. This can be non-conscious, but it must be conscious sometimes, and I'll explain why now. Because intentionality and also meaning and understanding, these words, when we use them, they mean that something is about something for someone. So there must be this subject which can experience this as an integrated concept. If it was always non-conscious, then it would just be a lot of parts, and none of them would have this integrated experience that the subject has. And so there would be no aboutness. It couldn't be true. You couldn't have this thought about Paris, or the Eiffel Tower being in Paris. That can be true. if it's just different parts. None of them have this experience. But the subjects can have this integrated experience of the Eiffel Tower being in Paris, and it can be true if it's structurally similar to how in the world the actual Eiffel Tower is in Paris. So if you have this conscious subject, you can have thoughts that can be about something, and then they can also be non-conscious sometimes. You can have non-conscious thoughts about the Eiffel Tower being in Paris, and I think it makes sense to say that these are intentional because they are so similar to the conscious experience, but it must be conscious sometimes. If it had always been non-conscious, like a machine, then it wouldn't make sense to say it's intentional, because intentionality is this experience that something is about something for someone. So we've gone from the consistent relation, very narrow sense, to the wide sense of a larger framework, which then also needs, if in the full sense for intentionality, we need to add that it must sometimes also be conscious. And I'm going to talk a lot more about consciousness in chapter 7, but we've gone a step further now. So my claim is then that the image of the horse in consciousness is what makes the conscious experience about the horse, whereas the relating of the horse to other horse facts is what makes it about a horse. So the consciousness adds the intentionality or aboutness at all, whereas the relating to other parts of a framework is what makes it into a specific, about something specific, or a specific conscious experiences. Yes. Good. So that's the start of solving problems. Now, first connected to intentionality, and we'll move on to the next problem quite soon.